I was sitting in the attorney's office when I heard the number that would change everything. $33 million. The words seemed to echo in the mahogany-paneled room, bouncing off the leather-bound law books and the oil paintings of stern-faced judges. My husband, Richard, had been gone for 3 weeks, and I was still moving through life in a fog of grief, barely able to process the fact that I'd never hear his voice again, never feel his hand in mine, never share another quiet morning over coffee. "Mrs. Catherine Whitmore," the attorney Gerald Hastings said gently, "I know this is a lot to take in, especially given everything you're going through. But your husband was very specific about his wishes. The estate totals $33.7 million, to be exact. Everything goes to you, as his sole beneficiary." I stared at the documents spread across the massive desk, covered in legal language I couldn't quite focus on. 33 million. Richard and I had been comfortable, yes. He'd built a successful tech consulting business over 30 years. We'd lived well, traveled occasionally, never worried about money. But 33 million? I'd had no idea the business had been worth that much, or that his investments had grown so substantially. "There are various accounts," Gerald continued, flipping through pages. "Investment portfolios, business assets, real estate holdings beyond your primary residence, retirement funds. It's all detailed here. You'll need to make some decisions about how you want to proceed. But there's no rush. Take your time. Grieve. Process. We'll handle everything at your pace." I nodded numbly, signing documents where Gerald indicated, my hand shaking slightly as I wrote my name over and over. Catherine Ann Whitmore, a signature that now represented unimaginable wealth that felt meaningless without Richard beside me to share it. When I finally left the office 2 hours later, stepping out into the bright October afternoon, everything looked different. The parking lot, the trees beginning to turn autumn colors, the people walking past absorbed in their own lives. None of them knew that the woman standing there in the black dress and sensible shoes was now worth $33 million. None of them could see that I felt more empty than I ever had in my life. I sat in my car for a long time before driving home, trying to organize my thoughts. Richard had been 61 when he died, a sudden brain aneurysm that had taken him in his sleep. No warning, no goodbye, just there one night, peaceful and warm beside me, and gone by morning. We'd been married for 37 years. We'd raised one daughter, Melissa, who was now 34 and married with 2 children of her own. Melissa. I needed to tell Melissa about the inheritance. She'd been at the funeral, of course, devastated by her father's passing. They'd been close, or at least I thought they were close. Richard had always doted on her, his only child, his little girl, even when she'd grown into a woman with her own family. I drove home to the house Richard and I had shared for 25 years, a comfortable 4-bedroom colonial in a quiet neighborhood. The kind of house where you raised children and hosted holidays and built a life. Now it felt cavernous and silent, full of Richard's absence in every room. I called Melissa that evening, after I'd had time to process everything, after I'd walked through the house touching Richard's things and crying until I had no tears left. "Mom, how are you holding up?" Melissa's voice was warm with concern when she answered. I could hear my grandchildren, Emma and Noah, playing in the background, their laughter a brief bright spot in my darkness. "I'm managing, sweetheart. Listen, I need to talk to you about something important. I met with your father's attorney today." "Oh? How did that go?" There was something in her tone I couldn't quite identify. Interest, certainly, but something else underneath it. It was surprising. "Melissa, your father left me everything, and it turns out the estate is quite substantial. $33 million. The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long, I thought we'd been disconnected. "Melissa, are you there?" "I'm here." Her voice sounded strange, tight. 33 million. Wow, that's incredible, Mom. I had no idea Dad had done so well. Neither did I, honestly. He always handled the finances. I knew we were comfortable, but this, I trailed off. "I wanted you to know. This changes things, obviously. I'll need to make some decisions about the future, and I want to make sure you and the kids are taken care of. Your father would have wanted that. That's generous of you, Mom." Still that odd tone, like she was speaking from far away. "We should talk about this in person. Why don't you come over for dinner tomorrow? We can discuss everything properly." "That sounds wonderful," I'd love to see the kids. It's been too quiet here." After we hung up, I sat in Richard's favorite chair, the leather armchair by the window where he'd read the newspaper every evening. I pulled his cardigan around my shoulders, breathing in the faint scent of his cologne still clinging to the fabric. $33 million couldn't buy back a single moment with him, couldn't give me one more morning, one more conversation, one more chance to tell him I loved him. Money, I realized, meant absolutely nothing when you'd lost everything that mattered. The next evening, I drove to Melissa's house, a large modern home in a gated community about 30 minutes away. Melissa and her husband, Brad, had bought it 3 years ago, stretching their budget to afford the prestigious address. Brad was a financial advisor, successful enough but always seemed to be chasing the next big opportunity, the next wealthy client. I'd never been entirely comfortable with him, though I'd never said so to Melissa. He was smooth and charming on the surface, but there was something calculating in his eyes that had always made me uneasy. Melissa greeted me at the door with a hug that felt slightly stiff. "Mom, come in. Dinner's almost ready. The kids are so excited to see you." Emma and Noah, ages 7 and 5, came running when they heard my voice, and for a few minutes, everything felt normal again. I hugged my grandchildren, listened to their excited chatter about school and soccer and the new video game Dad had bought them. These moments of simple joy were what I'd been missing in the empty house. Brad appeared from his home office, his smile wide and his handshake firm. "Catherine, so good to see you. How are you holding up?" "Day by day," I said honestly. "Some moments are harder than others." Of course. Richard was a good man. We all miss him." The words were right, but they felt rehearsed somehow, like lines in a play he was performing. Dinner was pleasant enough on the surface. Melissa had made Richard's favorite pot roast, a gesture that touched me even as it made my eyes sting with fresh tears. We talked about the children, about Melissa's part-time work as a graphic designer, about Brad's business, surface conversation that carefully avoided the elephant in the room. It wasn't until after the kids were in bed, after Melissa had served coffee in the formal living room, that Brad brought up what we were all thinking about. "So, Catherine," he said, leaning forward in his chair with an expression of concern that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Melissa told me about Richard's estate. That must have been quite a shock for you." "It was," I admitted. "I had no idea he'd accumulated so much." $33 million is an enormous responsibility," Brad continued, "especially for someone in your position. Managing that kind of wealth requires expertise, strategy, careful planning. One wrong move and you could lose significant portions to taxes, bad investments, market fluctuations." I sipped my coffee, waiting to see where this was going. "The good news is, you have resources right here in your family." Brad's smile widened. "I handle portfolios of this size for several of my clients. I could take this on for you. Make sure everything is properly structured, optimized for growth and tax efficiency. It would give you peace of mind, knowing your assets are being professionally managed." "That's thoughtful of you to offer," I said carefully. "But Richard's attorney mentioned that the estate is already structured fairly well." Richard apparently worked with a team of financial advisors and attorneys to set everything up. Something flickered across Brad's face, irritation, quickly masked. Of course. But estate planning is different from active management. You'll need someone making day-to-day decisions, monitoring markets, adjusting strategies. That team Richard worked with, they're probably charging enormous fees. As family, I could do this for you at a much more reasonable rate. Brad has handled all our investments brilliantly," Melissa added, her hand reaching out to squeeze her husband's arm. "We've done really well under his guidance. He could do the same for you, Mom." I looked at my daughter, trying to read her expression. There was something in her eyes I hadn't seen before, an intensity, an eagerness. It made something cold settle in my stomach. "I appreciate the offer," I said slowly, "but I think for now I need to take some time to understand what I have before I make any major decisions. This is all so new, and I'm still grieving. I'm not ready to think about portfolio management." Of course, Brad said again, but his smile had tightened. "No pressure at all. Just know that the offer stands whenever you're ready. Family takes care of family, right?" "Right," I echoed, but the words felt hollow. The conversation moved on to other topics, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. The way Brad and Melissa had looked at each other when discussing the money, the rehearsed quality of Brad's pitch, the eagerness in Melissa's eyes. When I left an hour later, Melissa walked me to my car. The October air was crisp, leaves crunching under our feet. "Mom," she said, her voice low. "I know Brad came on strong in there. He's just excited to help. We both are. We want to make sure you're taken care of." "I know, sweetheart." I hugged her, but she felt stiff in my arms again, distracted. "Just think about it, okay? It would be such a weight off your shoulders. Let us help carry this burden." Burden? The word struck me as odd. $33 million was many things. But was it really a burden? Or was it something else Brad and Melissa wanted to lift from me? I drove home troubled, unable to shake the uneasy feeling that had settled over me during dinner. When I got home, I pulled out all the documents Gerald had given me, spreading them across the dining room table. Page after page of financial details, account numbers, investment summaries. Richard had been meticulous. Every asset was documented, every account clearly labeled. There were stocks, bonds, mutual funds, real estate holdings in 3 different states, his business assets, retirement accounts. It was overwhelming in its complexity. I spent hours that night going through everything, trying to understand what I now owned, trying to see what Richard had built, the legacy he'd left not just for me but for Melissa and our grandchildren. He'd worked so hard for all of this, spending long hours building his business, making careful investment decisions, planning for our future. And now Brad wanted to manage it all. Brad, who I'd never entirely trusted. Brad, who looked at me with those calculating eyes like he was already spending money that wasn't his. The next morning I called Gerald Hastings at his office. "Gerald, I need to ask you something. Richard's financial team, the advisors he worked with, are they still actively managing things?" "Absolutely," Gerald confirmed. Richard had an excellent relationship with Sterling Financial Group. They've been handling his investments for over 15 years. Very reputable firm. They're aware of Richard's passing and are ready to continue managing the portfolio in accordance with his established strategies, unless you want to make changes, of course. And their fees? Very reasonable for the level of service and expertise they provide. Richard negotiated an excellent rate years ago. I can send you their complete fee schedule if you'd like. Please do. And Gerald, one more thing. If I wanted to, understand more about what I have, learn how to read these statements and reports, would that firm be willing to educate me? Catherine, that's exactly what they're there for. In fact, Richard specifically instructed them that if anything happened to him, they were to take whatever time necessary to help you understand every aspect of the portfolio. He wanted you to be informed and comfortable with all the decisions. Tears pricked my eyes. Of course Richard had thought of that. He'd always been thoughtful, always planning ahead, always making sure I'd be okay. Thank you, Gerald. I'd like to schedule a meeting with them, soon. I'll set it up today. I hung up feeling slightly better. I didn't need Brad's help. I had professionals Richard had trusted. People who had no personal stake in the money beyond their contracted fees. People who wouldn't look at my inheritance as an opportunity for themselves. Over the next week, I met with Richard's financial team 3 times. Michael Chen, the lead advisor, and his colleague, Patricia Blackwell, walked me through everything with patience and clarity. They showed me how to read the statements, explained the investment strategies Richard had chosen, outlined the tax implications of various decisions I might need to make. Your husband was very wise, Michael told me during our 3rd meeting. He diversified excellently, balanced risk and growth appropriately for his age and goal. This portfolio is set up to continue generating income for you for the rest of your life, with plenty left over for your heirs. He was always the smart one with money, I said, managing a small smile. I trusted him completely. And you can trust what he built, Patricia added. We're here to maintain his vision. Unless you want to make changes, our job is to serve your interests, to protect and grow your wealth according to your wishes. I thought about Brad's offer, about how he'd emphasized that he could do this at a much more reasonable rate as family, about how eager he'd seemed to get his hands on the management of $33 million. I appreciate everything you're doing, I told them. Please continue exactly as Richard had established. I trust his judgment. That evening, Melissa called. We'd spoken briefly a few times since the dinner at her house, but nothing substantial. She sounded cheerful on the phone, asking about my day, telling me about something funny Noah had said. Then, casually, as if it were an afterthought, "So, Mom, have you thought any more about Brad's offer? He was mentioning today that October is actually an ideal time to restructure investments for tax purposes. Something about year-end strategies and capital gains management. I don't understand all of it, but he says if you're going to make changes, sooner is better. I've actually met with your father's existing financial team," I said. "They're quite good, very thorough. They've been managing the portfolio for years and know all the ins and outs. I'm comfortable continuing with them." Silence. Then, "Oh, I didn't realize you were already taking meetings. I would have come with you, for support." "That's sweet, honey. But I needed to do this myself, to understand what your father left me, to take ownership of it." "Right, of course." Her voice had gone flat. "But Mom, you know Brad is family. He has our best interests at heart in a way some fee-charging firm never will. They're just in it for the money. Brad would charge fees too, sweetheart. That's how financial advisors work." "Sure, but family fees. You know what I mean. Reasonable rates. Not the exorbitant amounts these big firms charge. Actually, the firm's fees are quite reasonable. Your father negotiated them years ago. Gerald confirmed it." Another pause. "Well, if you've already made up your mind, I guess there's nothing more to say." "Melissa, is something wrong? You sound upset." "I'm not upset, Mom. I thought you'd want your family involved in these important decisions. I thought you'd trust us to help you." "I do trust you, but this isn't about trust. It's about maintaining what your father built, the way he intended it to be maintained." "Fine, whatever you think is best." Her tone said the opposite. "I have to go. The kids need baths." She hung up before I could say goodbye, leaving me staring at the phone with a growing sense of dread. This wasn't like Melissa. She'd never been particularly interested in financial matters before. She'd always been my creative, artistic daughter, more concerned with design projects and her children than with investment portfolios. But now, suddenly, she was pushing hard for Brad to manage my inheritance, pushing so hard that my refusal had made her angry. Why? Over the next few days, Melissa's communications dropped off dramatically. The daily calls stopped. When I reached out, her responses were brief and cool. She was busy. The kids had activities. She'd call me back later. But she never did. I tried not to read too much into it. She was probably just busy, genuinely busy with her family and her work. The coolness was probably my imagination, colored by grief and stress. But then, 9 days after my meeting with Gerald, after that first shocking revelation of the inheritance amount, I got a phone call that changed everything. "Mrs. Whitmore, this is Detective James Crawford with the Fraud Division of the State Police. I need to speak with you about your late husband's estate. Is this a good time?" My heart lurched. Fraud Division? What's this about? "I'd prefer to discuss this in person. Would you be able to come down to the station this afternoon? Or I could come to you if that's easier." "I'll come there," I said, my mind racing. "Give me the address." 2 hours later, I sat in a sterile interview room at the police station, my hands wrapped around a cup of terrible coffee, facing Detective Crawford and his partner, Detective Lisa Martinez. "Mrs. Whitmore," Crawford began, his expression serious. "We've been investigating some irregularities related to several estate accounts. Your name came up in connection with our investigation." "I don't understand. What kind of irregularities?" "Someone has been attempting to access accounts related to your late husband's estate. Multiple login attempts with incorrect passwords. Calls to financial institutions claiming to be you or your designated representative. Requests for account information and wire transfer capabilities." The room seemed to tilt. "Someone's trying to steal from the estate?" "We believe someone is attempting to gain unauthorized access, yes. The attempts have been clumsy enough that they've been flagged by security systems at multiple institutions, but they've been persistent." Detective Martinez leaned forward. "Mrs. Whitmore, have you given anyone your passwords or account information? Anyone at all?" "No, no one. I've barely had time to learn what passwords I even have." Have you discussed the estate details with anyone outside of your attorney and financial advisors? I hesitated. My daughter, Melissa, and her husband, Brad. I told them about the inheritance amount. Brad offered to manage the portfolio for me. The two detectives exchanged a look. Brad Cunningham? Crawford asked. Yes. Do you know him? Another exchange of glances. Mrs. Whitmore. Brad Cunningham is actually the reason we started this investigation. He's one of several people we've been monitoring in connection with a series of financial fraud cases. Nothing we've been able to prove yet, but enough red flags that we've been watching his activity. The coffee cup shook in my hands. You think Brad is trying to steal from me? We think someone with detailed knowledge of your estate has been making these access attempts. Someone who knew account numbers, approximate balances, the names of financial institutions involved. Someone who had enough information to seem legitimate to customer service representatives, at least initially. But I never gave Brad any specific account information, just the total amount of the inheritance. Did he ever have access to your home? To documents, computer files, mail? I thought back to the funeral, to the week after Richard's death when my house had been full of people coming and going, bringing food, offering condolences, helping with arrangements. Brad and Melissa had been there often, helping with practical matters. They were at the house several times right after Richard passed, I said slowly. Melissa has a key. She's my daughter. I never thought. We're not making accusations yet, Martinez said gently. But we need you to be very careful. Change all your passwords immediately. Notify all financial institutions that only you are authorized to access, or make changes to accounts. Put alerts on everything. And Mrs. Whitmore, until we figure out who's behind these attempts, I'd suggest you be very cautious about what information you share, even with family. I left the police station feeling sick. Brad, the detectives suspected Brad, and Brad had been in my house, had access to my things, could have easily looked through mail or documents in the chaos after Richard's funeral. And Melissa, my daughter, had she been part of this? Had she known what her husband was planning? That thought was almost too painful to bear. Not Melissa, not my little girl who I'd raised, who I'd loved unconditionally. Her entire life, she couldn't be involved in something like this. I drove home in a daze, barely aware of the traffic around me. When I got there, I walked through the house with new eyes, trying to remember who had been where during those terrible days after Richard's death. Brad had offered to help organize Richard's home office, sorting through papers and files. I'd been grateful for the help, too overwhelmed with grief to handle it myself. Had he been helping? Or had he been gathering information? I went to Richard's office, my hands trembling as I opened the file cabinet. Papers were indeed organized, neatly filed in labeled folders, but some of them were financial documents, bank statements, investment reports, account numbers clearly visible on the pages. Brad had seen all of this, had probably photographed it with his phone, creating his own records of my financial information. My phone rang, making me jump. I looked at the caller ID, Melissa. I almost didn't answer, but I needed to know, needed to hear her voice, to judge whether she knew what her husband had been doing. Hello? Mom. Her voice was strange, tight and stressed. Mom, we need to talk. Can I come over? Right now? What's this about, Melissa? Please, just let me come over. It's important. It's about Brad. My heart was pounding. What about Brad? I can't talk about this on the phone. Please, Mom. I need to see you. 20 minutes later, Melissa was at my door. She looked terrible. Her hair was pulled back messily, her face pale, her eyes red from crying. This wasn't the composed woman who'd served me pot roast in her formal dining room. This was someone on the edge of collapse. I let her in, my emotions warring between suspicion and concern. She was my daughter, but she was also married to a man the police were investigating. Melissa collapsed onto my couch, her whole body shaking. Mom, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Sorry for what, Melissa? She looked up at me with devastated eyes. Brad's been lying to me about everything, about his business, about our finances, about what he's been doing since Dad died. What has he been doing? I found documents on his computer. I wasn't snooping, I swear. I needed to print something, and his laptop was on his desk, unlocked, and I saw files with your name on them. So I opened them. Tears were streaming down her face now. Mom, He has everything. All your account information. All Dad's estate details. He's been trying to access your accounts. He's been planning." She broke off, sobbing so hard she could barely breathe. I sat down next to her, my own tears starting to fall. "Planning what, Melissa? He wants to steal it. All of it. He has this whole scheme worked out. He was going to convince you to let him manage everything, then slowly transfer funds to offshore accounts he controls. He's done this before, Mom, to other clients. I found evidence of it on his computer. That's why his business has been struggling. He's being investigated. He's going to lose his license. We're going to lose everything." The room spun. "How long have you known about this?" "I just found out yesterday. I confronted him about it last night, and he admitted everything. He said we were broke, that he'd made bad investments with our own money and lost it all. He said Dad's inheritance was our only way out, that you didn't need $33 million, that you'd be fine with a fraction of that, that taking some of it wasn't really stealing, because we're family." She looked at me with anguished eyes. I told him no. I told him I wouldn't be part of it, and he said if I didn't cooperate, he'd make it look like I was the one who'd planned the whole thing, that I'd manipulated him because I was greedy for my inheritance. Oh, Melissa. Mom, I swear I didn't know. I knew he wanted to manage your money, but I thought it was just about the fees, about having a prestigious client. I didn't know he was planning to steal from you. I would never. She broke down completely, her sobs filling the room. I held my daughter while she cried, my own mind racing. Brad had planned this, had used the chaos of Richard's death to gather information, had tried to manipulate me into giving him control, and when that failed, he'd tried to access accounts illegally, and now he was threatening to frame Melissa for his crimes. "Melissa," I said gently, when her sobs had quieted to hiccups, "I need you to tell me everything. Everything Brad said, everything you found, every detail you can remember." She nodded, wiping her eyes with the tissue I handed her. "There's something else, something I need to show you. Brad made me bring him when I came here. He's waiting outside in the car. He said he needs to talk to you, to explain, to make some kind of deal." My blood ran cold. Brad is outside right now? He's desperate, Mom. His whole life is falling apart. He's dangerous. I'm scared of what he might do. I stood up, my mind made up. "Call Detective Crawford. Right now. Give him this address and tell him Brad Cunningham is here. Tell him everything you just told me." While Melissa made the call with shaking hands, I went to the window and looked out. Brad's car was indeed parked on the street. I could see his silhouette in the driver's seat, his phone pressed to his ear. Who was he calling? What was he planning? The pieces were falling into place now, a puzzle I should have seen forming weeks ago. Brad's enthusiasm about managing the estate, Melissa's strange behavior after I'd told her about the inheritance, the cooling of our relationship when I'd refused Brad's help, the suspicious access attempts the detectives had warned me about. My own son-in-law had tried to rob me, had manipulated my grief-stricken daughter, had threatened to destroy her to cover his own crimes, and now he was outside my house, apparently planning some kind of confrontation, or negotiation, or threat. But I had one advantage. I knew what he'd done. I knew what he was, and I had my daughter back on my side, ready to tell the truth. Melissa hung up the phone. "They're on their way. 10 minutes, they said. Good. Now I need you to tell me everything you know, every detail. Because when those detectives get here, we're going to make sure Brad pays for what he's tried to do. Not just to me, but to you and our family." Melissa nodded, her jaw setting with determination despite her tears. "There's a folder on his computer. Everything's in there. His whole plan. Account numbers, transfer schedules, offshore bank details. I took photos of everything with my phone before I left the house. I was so scared he'd delete it all before anyone could see it." "Smart girl," I said, pride mixing with my fear and anger. "Show me." As Melissa pulled out her phone and began swiping through dozens of photos of damning documents, I heard a car door slam outside. Through the window, I watched Brad get out of his vehicle and start walking toward my front door, his expression set in grim determination. He was coming to threaten me, to manipulate me, to try one more time to get his hands on money that wasn't his. But this time, I was ready. This time, he wouldn't catch me grieving and vulnerable and trusting. This time, he was going to face the consequences of trying to rob a widow who just discovered she was much stronger than anyone including herself, had ever imagined. The doorbell rang. Melissa gripped my hand. "Don't let him in, Mom. Please don't let him in." I looked at my daughter, saw the fear and regret and fierce love in her eyes, and made my decision. I'm not letting him in, but I am going to talk to him, because I want him to know that I know. I want him to see that he failed. I walked to the door, leaving it locked, and spoke through it in a voice that didn't shake, despite my pounding heart. "I know what you've been doing, Brad. The police know too. They're on their way here right now. Catherine, please." His voice through the door was smooth, controlled, the same voice that had offered to help me at family dinner. "There's been a misunderstanding. I can explain everything. Just let me come in, and we can talk like family." "We're not family," I said clearly. "Family doesn't steal. Family doesn't manipulate. Family doesn't threaten. You're not family. You're a criminal." "Melissa has been lying to you," he said, his tone shifting slightly, becoming harder. "She's the one who wanted your money. She's the one who planned this whole thing. I was just trying to protect her, but she's making me the villain to cover her own tracks." Through the door, I heard sirens in the distance, growing closer. Brad heard them too. His voice became urgent, almost panicked. "Catherine, listen to me. I can make this right. Whatever Melissa told you, I can prove she's lying. I have evidence. Just give me 5 minutes." "I don't need 5 minutes," I said. "I don't need your explanations, or your proof, or your lies. I have everything I need right here. Melissa showed me the photos from your computer, Brad. Your whole plan, documented by your own hand. So whatever story you're about to tell, save it for the detectives." The sirens were very close now. Brad's voice turned vicious, the smooth mask finally cracking. "You stupid woman. You have no idea what you've done. That money should have been easy to take. You're too old and too dumb to manage it anyway. All you had to do was trust me, let me handle things, and none of this would have been necessary. But you had to be difficult. You had to ask questions. You had to..." His rant cut off as police cars pulled up in front of the house, lights flashing. Through the window, I watched Detective Crawford and 3 other officers approach, their hands on their weapons as they ordered Brad to put his hands where they could see them. I watched through the window as they handcuffed my son-in-law, read him his rights, and put him in the back of a patrol car. Watched as the man who'd tried to steal from me, who'd threatened my daughter, who'd shown his true face at last, was driven away. Only then did I open the door, stepping out into the cool October evening to speak with the detectives. Melissa came with me, still clutching my hand, watching her husband disappear, with tears streaming down her face. "I'm so sorry, Mom," she whispered again, "for everything, for not seeing what he was, for pushing you to let him help, for being so blind." I squeezed her hand. "You weren't blind, honey. You were betrayed. There's a difference. And when you realized the truth, you did the right thing. You came to me. You showed me the evidence. You chose to protect me instead of protect him. That's what matters now." Detective Crawford approached us, his expression grim. "Mrs. Whitmore, Miss Cunningham, we're going to need full statements from both of you. This is going to be a long night." "That's fine," I said. "We'll tell you everything." Part 2. The police station at night had a surreal quality. Fluorescent lights too bright against the darkness outside. The smell of stale coffee and old paperwork filling the air. Melissa and I sat in separate interview rooms for hours, each giving our detailed statements to different detectives. I recounted everything from the moment Gerald had told me about the inheritance to Brad's attempted manipulation at my front door. Melissa, in another room, was providing the evidence she'd photographed from Brad's computer and detailing the confrontation they'd had when she'd discovered his scheme. It was past midnight when we finally finished. Detective Crawford walked me to the waiting area where Melissa sat, looking exhausted and defeated. Her eyes were swollen from crying, her hands twisted together in her lap. "Mrs. Whitmore," Crawford said, "we have enough evidence to charge Brad Cunningham with attempted fraud, identity theft, and several other counts. The evidence Miss Cunningham provided is damning. Combined with the attempted account access we'd already flagged, we have a solid case." "What happens now?" I asked. "He'll be arraigned tomorrow morning. Given the seriousness of the charges and the amount of money involved, bail will likely be set quite high. We'll also be expanding our investigation into his other business dealings. Based on what we found on his computer, he's been running similar schemes with other clients. You may not have been his first victim, just his most recent target. Melissa made a small sound of distress. Crawford's expression softened. Miss Cunningham, I know this is difficult, but you did the right thing. Your cooperation likely saved your mother from significant financial loss and will help us build cases against your husband that could prevent other people from being victimized. After the detectives released us, Melissa and I sat in my car in the police station parking lot, neither of us quite ready to drive away and face what came next. I can't go home, Melissa said quietly. I can't go back to that house, knowing what he was planning, knowing he was going to destroy you, and had no problem threatening to destroy me too. Then don't go home. Come stay with me. Bring the kids. We'll figure everything else out tomorrow. She turned to look at me, her eyes filling with fresh tears. How can you still want me around? After what I did, after I pushed you to trust Brad, after I got angry when you wouldn't let him manage your money. Melissa, you didn't know what he was planning. You thought he was genuinely trying to help. And the moment you discovered the truth, you chose me. You chose to do what was right, even though it meant destroying your own marriage. That took courage. I feel like such a fool. How did I not see what he was? We've been married for 9 years. How did I miss all the signs? I reached over and took her hand. Because you loved him. Because you wanted to believe the best in him. Because betrayal from someone we love is almost impossible to see until it's right in front of us. Undeniable. You're not a fool, honey. You're human. We drove to Melissa's house together in separate cars, while she packed bags for herself and the kids, who were sleeping upstairs oblivious to the drama unfolding around them. I helped gather essentials, clothes, toys, school things, evidence of the normal family life that was about to be shattered. What am I going to tell Emma and Noah? Melissa asked, her voice breaking as she folded her children's pajamas. How do I explain that their father did something terrible, that he might go to prison? You tell them age-appropriate truth, I said gently. That Daddy made some very bad choices and has to face consequences. That you and I will make sure they're safe and loved. That this isn't their fault and nothing they did caused this. They're going to be devastated. Yes, but they have you and they have me. We'll get them through this together. By 2 a.m, we had everything loaded into both cars. Melissa woke the kids gently, carrying a sleepy Noah, while Emma walked beside her, rubbing her eyes. Grandma's house? Emma asked, confused. In the middle of the night? We're going to stay with Grandma for a while, Melissa said, her voice surprisingly steady. Won't that be fun? Like an extended sleepover. At my house, I tucked my grandchildren into the guest room beds, kissing their foreheads as they drifted back to sleep, innocent and unaware of how their world was about to change. Melissa and I made up the couch with sheets and blankets for her. Though neither of us expected to sleep much, we sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I'd sat processing Richard's death just weeks ago, now processing a different kind of loss, the death of trust, the death of a family, as we'd known it. I keep thinking about all the times he seemed so concerned about you, Melissa said, staring into the cup of tea she wasn't drinking. After Dad died, he'd tell me we needed to check on you more, make sure you weren't being taken advantage of. And all along, he was the one planning to take advantage of you. He's a skilled manipulator, Melissa. That's what makes people like him dangerous. They're convincing because they believe their own justifications. Brad probably actually convinced himself that he deserved some of your father's money, that managing it for me was doing me a favor, that taking what he needed wasn't really stealing. The file on his computer had notes, she said, her voice hollow, about how to handle you if you got suspicious, about what arguments to use to convince you to sign over financial power of attorney, about how much he could take before you'd notice. He had it all mapped out like some kind of business plan. Stealing from my mother was just another deal to close. I reached across the table and gripped her hand. But he failed, because you found out and you stopped him. Focus on that, not on what he planned to do. What's going to happen to us? I can't afford the house on my own. My graphic design work barely covers groceries and the kids' activities. Brad handled all our finances, and now I'm realizing I have no idea what our real financial situation even is. Then tomorrow we'll find out. We'll get you a good attorney. We'll figure out what assets you actually have versus what Brad claimed you had. We'll protect you and the kids with Dad's money, she said. looking at me with shame in her eyes. "You're going to have to use your inheritance to help me because my husband tried to steal it. The irony is awful." "No," I said firmly. "I'm going to use some of my resources to help my daughter and grandchildren because that's what family does. Not obligation, not because you're owed it, but because I love you and I want to help. There's a difference." She broke down crying again, but these tears seemed different, cleaner somehow. Not the tears of panic and shame from earlier, but tears of grief and relief mixed together. Grief for the marriage that was ending, relief that the truth was finally out. I held her while she cried. This daughter I'd raised, who'd made a mistake in marrying the wrong man, but who'd ultimately chosen right when it mattered most. She'd chosen truth over comfortable lies. She'd chosen to protect me over protecting her marriage. She'd chosen to face hard consequences rather than be complicit in crime. That took strength I wasn't sure I would have had at her age. The next morning arrived too quickly. Emma and Noah woke up confused but excited to be at Grandma's house. I made them pancakes while Melissa explained that they wouldn't be going to school today, that some things had happened that she needed to explain. I took the kids into the backyard to play, while Melissa made phone calls to the kids' school, explaining they'd be absent, to her lawyer, requesting an emergency appointment, to her best friend Sarah, asking if she could come over because Melissa needed support. Sarah arrived within an hour, taking one look at Melissa's face and pulling her into a fierce hug. "What happened? Your text scared me." Melissa told her everything. I heard it through the open window as I pushed Noah on the swing set Richard had built years ago for Melissa when she was small. Sarah's voice rose in shock and anger as the story unfolded, and by the end she was crying too, mourning the loss of what she'd thought was a happy marriage in her friend's life. "I knew something was off about Brad," Sarah said. "I could never put my finger on it, but something about him always felt calculated. I'm so sorry, Mel. I should have said something." "What would you have said?" "That you had a vague bad feeling. I wouldn't have listened. I was in love with the version of him I wanted to be real." Over the next few days, the situation unfolded with devastating speed. Brad's arraignment resulted in bail set at $500,000, which he couldn't make. He remained in custody while his attorney argued for a reduction. The investigation into his business dealings revealed a pattern of fraud going back at least 5 years, with multiple victims who'd been too embarrassed to come forward initially. The local news picked up the story. Prominent financial advisor arrested for attempted fraud. Brad's face appeared on television, being led into the courthouse in handcuffs. Melissa's phone rang constantly with calls from friends, reporters, former clients of Brad seeking information. We unplugged the house phone. Melissa changed her number. We kept the kids home from school for a week until the initial media frenzy died down. Emma, at 7, was old enough to understand that something bad had happened with her father, but young enough that the specifics remained mercifully vague. Noah, at 5, mainly seemed confused about why they weren't going home. "When is Daddy coming to get us?" he asked me one evening, as I read him a bedtime story. "Daddy can't come right now, sweetheart. He has to deal with some grown-up problems. But Mommy and I are going to take care of you. Is Daddy in trouble?" Children's intuition is remarkable. "Yes, honey. Daddy made some bad choices, and now he has to face the consequences. But that doesn't change how much he loves you." I wasn't sure if that last part was true. Did Brad love his children? Or had they been accessories to the life he was trying to build? The respectable facade behind which he'd hidden his schemes. But the kids needed to believe their father loved them, regardless of what kind of person he'd turned out to be. Melissa met with her divorce attorney, a sharp woman named Rebecca Thornton, who'd handled high-asset divorces involving fraud before. "Your case is actually fairly straightforward," Rebecca told her at their first meeting. "Given your husband's criminal activity and the fact that he threatened to frame you for his crimes, you have grounds for divorce based on cruel treatment and criminal conduct. We can also likely demonstrate that any assets in his name were obtained through illegal means and therefore shouldn't be considered marital property." "I don't want anything from him," Melissa said. "I just want custody of my kids and to be free of this." "We'll make sure you get both. And Mrs. Whitmore," Rebecca turned to me, "you should know that Brad's attorney may try to claim that some of what he did was justified because he believed his wife had a legitimate expectation of inheritance from her father. They might argue that he was simply trying to access money that would eventually be Melissa's anyway. But Dad's will left everything to Mom, Melissa protested. I have no legal claim to any of it. Exactly, which is why that argument won't hold water. But they might try it anyway, so be prepared. They did try it. Brad's attorney filed motions claiming that Brad had acted based on Melissa's insistence that she deserved a portion of her father's estate, that he'd been pressured by his wife to find ways to access funds she felt entitled to. The argument was absurd, contradicted by every piece of evidence, but it was cruel in its strategic targeting of Melissa. He's trying to hurt me even from jail, Melissa said when we read the filing. He knows I'll see this. He knows I'll know he's trying to paint me as greedy and manipulative. He's trying to punish me for turning him in. Let him try, I said. We have the truth on our side. We have evidence. We have your testimony about what really happened. His lies won't work, but they hurt anyway. Seeing her husband, the father of her children, try to destroy her reputation to save himself was a betrayal that cut even deeper than the original crime. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for 6 weeks after Brad's arrest. In that time, our life settled into a strange new normal. Melissa and the kids living with me. Emma and Noah going back to school but coming home to Grandma's house instead of their own. Melissa working on her graphic design projects from my dining room table, trying to bring in income to contribute to the household expenses I kept insisting she didn't need to worry about. I can't just live off you, Mom, she argued. I need to support my own kids. You're rebuilding your life from scratch because you chose to do the right thing. Let me help. That's what this money is for. Not just sitting in accounts growing interest, but actually making a difference in the lives of people I love. Michael Chen, my financial advisor, helped me set up a trust for Emma and Noah's education. Another trust to provide Melissa with income until she could get back on her feet and establish her own stable career. I bought Melissa a reliable used car to replace the luxury SUV she'd been driving that was in Brad's name and would likely be seized as an asset obtained through fraud. This is too much, Melissa protested when I showed her the car. A practical Honda in good condition. It's a car. You need a car. I can afford a car. Stop arguing and just say thank you. She hugged me instead of answering, which I took as acceptance. Richard's financial team helped me understand that I could actually afford to be generous, that $33 million, properly managed, would continue to grow even as I used portions of it to help my family. The money Richard had worked so hard to accumulate was finally being used for exactly what he would have wanted, taking care of the people we loved. The preliminary hearing arrived with autumn turning to early winter. The courthouse was old and imposing, with marble floors and high ceilings that made every sound echo. Melissa and I sat in the gallery while the prosecutors presented their evidence against Brad. Document after document, screenshot after screenshot, bank records, attempted access logs, the damning photos from Brad's own computer showing his complete plan to systematically steal from me. Over a period of years, the prosecutor painted a picture of calculated, premeditated fraud, of a man who had seen his father-in-law's death as an opportunity rather than a tragedy. Brad sat at the defense table in an orange jumpsuit, looking nothing like the smooth, confident man who'd offered to manage my portfolio over pot roast dinner. He looked diminished, angry, and when his eyes met mine across the courtroom, I saw pure hatred in them. He blamed me for not being an easy victim, blamed me for asking questions and trusting my late husband's financial team instead of trusting him, blamed me for his own exposure and downfall. I stared back steadily until he looked away. I wasn't afraid of him anymore. I wasn't intimidated by his anger or his schemes. I was simply a woman who'd protected herself and her family, and if he hated me for that, so be it. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s named Judge Patricia Morrison, reviewed all the evidence with meticulous attention. When the prosecutor finished presenting, Brad's attorney stood to argue that the charges should be dismissed, that Brad's actions were merely those of an overeager financial advisor who'd made technical mistakes in trying to help a client. Judge Morrison cut him off. "Counselor, I've reviewed the evidence presented today. Attempted access to accounts without authorization is not a technical mistake. documented plans to systematically transfer funds to offshore accounts, is not overeager helping. This court finds sufficient evidence to bind the defendant over for trial. On all charges, bail is continued at $500,000. Next court date is set for January 15th. Brad's attorney tried to argue for bail reduction. Judge Morrison denied it. Given the defendant's demonstrated willingness to commit fraud and his threats against his own wife, I consider him a flight risk and a potential danger. Bail stands. As they led Brad out of the courtroom, he turned and looked at Melissa one more time. She met his gaze without flinching, and I saw her jaw set with determination. She was stronger than she knew, stronger than he'd ever given her credit for. Outside the courthouse, we were met by a small group of reporters shouting questions. Detective Crawford appeared at our side, helping us navigate to our car, while declining all requests for comment. "The trial will be more intense than this," he warned us. "Brad's attorney is going to go after both of you on the stand. He'll try to make it seem like you're vindictive women out to destroy an innocent man. You need to be prepared for that." "We'll be ready," I said. In the car, Melissa was quiet, staring out the window at the city passing by. I keep thinking about something Brad said during one of our fights before I left. He said I was throwing away our whole life over nothing. That what he'd planned to do wasn't even really wrong because family shares resources. That I was choosing you over our marriage like some kind of mama's girl who couldn't grow up. And what did you say? I told him that choosing to protect my mother from theft wasn't being a mama's girl. It was being a decent human being. That if he couldn't understand the difference, then our marriage was based on a lie anyway. She turned to look at me. Was I wrong, Mom? Did I destroy my marriage over this? Should I have tried to work with him, get him to stop without involving the police? Melissa, listen to me. You didn't destroy your marriage. Brad destroyed it the moment he decided to commit fraud. You couldn't have worked with him to stop because people like him don't stop. They just get better at hiding what they're doing. And if you tried to keep this quiet, tried to handle it within the family, he would have held that over you forever. You would have been complicit in his crime. No, sweetheart. You did exactly the right thing, even though it was the hardest thing. She nodded slowly. I just wish it didn't hurt so much. Of course it hurts. You loved him. You built a life with him. You had children with him. Losing that, even when you know it's necessary, is still a loss worth grieving. The months between the preliminary hearing and the trial were both endless and too quick. The holidays arrived, the first without Richard, the first with Melissa and the kids living with me, the first under the shadow of the upcoming trial. We made the best of it. Emma and Noah helped me decorate the house, hanging ornaments on the tree that Richard and I had collected over 37 years of marriage. We baked cookies and watched holiday movies and tried to create normalcy for the children who were dealing with losing their father, even though he was still alive. On Christmas morning, Brad called from jail. Melissa almost didn't accept the collect call, but ultimately decided to let Emma and Noah talk to their father. I left the room to give them privacy, but I could hear their small voices through the door. "Hi, Daddy. We miss you. When are you coming home? Grandma's house is nice, but I miss our house. I got a new bike for Christmas. Mommy says you'll be able to see it someday." When Melissa got back on the phone to wrap up the call, I heard Brad's voice through the receiver, loud enough to carry. "This is your fault, Melissa. You're poisoning our kids against me. You're destroying our family because your mother convinced you I'm some kind of monster. I hope you're happy." Melissa's response was quiet but firm. "I'm protecting our kids from learning that crime and manipulation are acceptable. I'm teaching them that actions have consequences, and I'm showing them that their mother has enough strength to do what's right, even when it's hard. Goodbye, Brad." She hung up and sat very still for a moment. Then she looked at me. Did I do the right thing? Letting them talk to him? Yes, they needed to hear his voice. They needed to know he's alive and that this separation isn't their fault. But they also need to see you standing firm, not letting him manipulate or intimidate you. You gave them both. That was exactly right. The trial began on a cold January morning. The courtroom was packed with reporters, curious spectators, some of Brad's former clients who'd been victims of his earlier schemes, and the handful of family and friends who were supporting us. Sarah sat right behind Melissa and me, a solid presence of support. My neighbor Dorothy, who I'd known for 15 years, was there too. I'm here for moral support and to glare at that terrible man who tried to steal from you, she'd announced. Someone needs to represent righteous anger. The prosecution's case was methodical and damning. They called Detective Crawford to testify about the investigation, Michael Chen to testify about the attempted access to my accounts, Gerald Hastings to testify about the estate and the proper procedures for managing it. Each witness built on the last, creating an undeniable picture of Brad's fraudulent activity. Then they called me to the stand. I walked up with my head high, placed my hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth. The prosecutor, a skilled woman named Amanda Reeves, led me through my testimony, gently but thoroughly. Mrs. Whitmore, can you describe your emotional state in the weeks after your husband's death? I was devastated. Richard and I had been married for 37 years. His death was sudden and unexpected. I was grieving deeply. And when you learned about the size of your inheritance, how did that make you feel? Overwhelmed, shocked. It was an enormous amount of money that I'd had no idea existed. I felt lost, trying to figure out how to handle it. When your son-in-law, Brad Cunningham, offered to manage the estate for you, what was your initial reaction? I was uncertain. I appreciated the offer, but something felt off about how eager he was, how he emphasized that he could do it cheaper than professionals. Because we were family. What made you decide not to accept his offer? I spoke with my husband's attorney and learned that Richard had already established a team of financial advisors he'd worked with for years. I decided to trust Richard's judgment and continue with them. And how did Brad react to that decision? He seemed disappointed, frustrated. My daughter Melissa also seemed upset that I hadn't taken him up on the offer. Amanda walked me through the rest of the timeline. The cooling of Melissa's communication, the discovery of attempted account access, the confrontation at my door when Brad had tried one last time to manipulate me. My voice stayed steady throughout, even when discussing the most painful parts. Then it was the defense attorney's turn. Marcus Webb was everything I'd expected. Smooth, aggressive, ready to twist anything I said. Mrs. Whitmore, isn't it true that you and your son-in-law had a difficult relationship even before your husband's death? We had a cordial relationship. I wouldn't say difficult. But you never really liked him, did you? You thought he wasn't good enough for your daughter. I had reservations about some of his behaviors, yes, but I kept those to myself because Melissa loved him. Reservations that made you predisposed to think the worst of him when he tried to help you? Mr. Webb, the police investigation, the attempted account access, the documents found on his computer, none of that was my imagination or predisposition. That was evidence of actual criminal activity. He tried to rattle me, to make it seem like I was a controlling mother who'd never accepted my daughter's husband and had jumped at the chance to destroy him. But I'd been preparing for this. Amanda had coached me, and more importantly, I had the truth on my side. Isn't it true, Mrs. Whitmore, that you could easily afford to help your daughter and grandchildren financially, but you've chosen not to? That's completely false. I've been supporting them since they moved in with me. I've set up education trusts for my grandchildren. I've provided everything they need, only after destroying their father and their family life. I didn't destroy anything, Mr. Webb. Your client did that when he chose to commit crimes. The judge sustained several objections during Webb's cross-examination, clearly unimpressed with his tactics. When I was finally excused from the stand, I felt drained but steady. I told the truth. That was all I could do. Then Melissa took the stand. I watched my daughter swear her oath, and my heart ached for her. She looked fragile but determined, her voice shaking slightly as she began to answer Amanda's questions. Miss Cunningham, how long were you married to the defendant? 9 years. We have 2 children together. Can you describe your relationship with your mother? We've always been close. She's been my biggest supporter my whole life. After my father died, she was there for me. Through my grief, she's been an amazing mother. When you learned about your father's estate, what was your initial reaction? I was happy for my mom, relieved that she'd be financially secure, sad that Dad wasn't there to enjoy the success he'd worked so hard for. Did you expect to inherit anything from your father's estate? No, I knew he'd left everything to Mom. That's completely normal and right. She was his wife. They built that wealth together. When your husband offered to manage your mother's finances, did you support that offer? Melissa's voice caught. Yes, I thought he was trying to help. I thought it would be good to keep things in the family. When did you first suspect that your husband's intentions weren't genuine? When my mom decided to continue with Dad's financial team and Brad got really upset about it. His reaction seemed disproportionate. Then Mom stopped hearing from me as much, and Brad kept bringing up the money, kept pushing me to pressure Mom to change her mind. It started to feel wrong, but I didn't want to believe my husband was capable of anything bad. Amanda took Melissa through the discovery of Brad's plan, the confrontation that followed, the decision to contact the police. Melissa cried through parts of it, but her voice never wavered from the truth. Then came Webb's cross-examination. He went after Melissa with particular cruelty, trying to paint her as a woman who'd betrayed her husband to curry favor with her wealthy mother. Miss Cunningham, isn't it true that you've always been financially dependent on your mother? No, Brad and I supported ourselves. We had our own income. But you've lived in your mother's house, rent-free for months now, because my husband's crimes made me afraid to stay in my own home with my children. My mother offered us a safe place. That's not dependence. That's family support during a crisis. A crisis you created by going to the police instead of handling this privately, as a family. I went to the police because my husband committed crime, because he threatened to frame me if I didn't cooperate with his plans, because protecting my children and my mother was more important than protecting a criminal. Even if that criminal was your children's father, the man you promised to love and honor. I promised to love and honor the man I thought he was, not the criminal he turned out to be. And yes, even if it meant my children growing up without their father in their lives, I chose to do what was right, because that's what good parents do. They model integrity, even when it's hard. Webb tried to break her, but Melissa held firm. By the time she stepped down from the stand, there wasn't a dry eye in the courtroom's gallery. My daughter had faced her worst nightmare, publicly admitting her marriage was a sham. Her judgment was flawed. Her life had fallen apart, and had done it with grace and courage. The defense's case was weak. Brad chose not to testify, probably on his attorney's advice, since anything he said would likely incriminate him further. They called a few character witnesses who testified that Brad had always seemed like a nice guy, a good father, someone who wouldn't hurt anyone. But nice guys didn't document plans to steal millions from their mother-in-law. Good fathers didn't threaten to frame their wives for crimes. The character witnesses couldn't overcome the mountain of evidence. The closing arguments came on the trial's 5th day. Amanda Reeves was passionate and clear. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this case is about a man who saw opportunity in tragedy, who looked at a grieving widow and saw not a person deserving of compassion, but a target for theft, who manipulated his own wife, threatened his own family, and planned an elaborate fraud, all for money that was never his to take. The evidence is overwhelming. The defendant's guilt is clear. We ask that you find him guilty on all counts and send a message that this kind of predatory behavior will not be tolerated. Marcus Webb's closing was all about reasonable doubt, about a family torn apart by misunderstanding, about a man whose only crime was trying to help and being misinterpreted. It rang hollow against the facts. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. When they returned, the forewoman stood and delivered the verdict in a clear, steady voice. On the count of attempted grand theft, we find the defendant guilty. On the count of identity theft, we find the defendant guilty. On the count of fraud, we find the defendant guilty. Guilty, 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 on every single count. Brad's face went white. His attorney put a hand on his shoulder, but he shrugged it off violently. As they led him away to await sentencing, he turned and looked directly at Melissa. His mouth formed words I could read, even though he didn't speak them aloud. "This is your fault." Melissa looked right back at him and shook her head slowly. "No," she mouthed back. "It's yours." The sentencing hearing came 2 weeks later. The judge heard impact statements from me and from 2 of Brad's other victims who'd come forward during the trial. People he'd defrauded in smaller amounts in previous schemes. "Your Honor," I said when it was my turn to speak, "Brad Cunningham didn't just try to steal money from me. He tried to steal my security, my peace of mind, My trust in family. He manipulated my grief for his gain. He threatened my daughter to cover his crimes. His actions showed a complete lack of conscience or remorse. I ask that you impose a sentence that reflects the severity of what he attempted and the harm he caused. Judge Morrison looked at Brad with undisguised contempt. Mr. Cunningham, you had every advantage. A good education, a successful career, a loving family. Instead of building on those advantages honestly, you chose to prey on vulnerable people. You chose to see your wife's grief over her father's death as an opportunity. You chose to plan elaborate fraud against a widow who'd just lost her husband. And when caught, you showed no remorse, only anger at being held accountable. This court sentences you to 12 years in state prison on the combined charges. You will also be required to pay full restitution to all victims, although in the case of Mrs. Whitmore, the attempted nature of the crime means that amount is nominal. Your professional license is permanently revoked. And when you're released, you will be on probation for an additional 5 years. I hope you use your time in prison to reflect on the harm you've caused and the life you've thrown away through your own choices. 12 years. Brad would be in his 50s when he was released. Emma and Noah would be grown. Melissa would have rebuilt her entire life without him. As they led him away for the final time, Brad looked at us once more. But this time there was no hatred in his eyes, just emptiness. The reality of what he'd lost seemed to finally be sinking in. Outside the courthouse, reporters clustered around us again. But this time I stopped to give a brief statement. My husband Richard spent 30 years building a successful business through hard work and integrity. He left me his legacy with the expectation that I would be a good steward of it. Today's verdict confirms that his trust was not misplaced. I will continue to honor his memory by using our resources wisely and by protecting our family. Thank you. It was over. The trial, the investigation, the fear, and uncertainty, all of it was finally over. In the car, Melissa sat very still, processing everything. 12 years, she said finally. The kids will be 19 and 17 when he gets out. Yes, he'll miss everything. Their school years, their graduations, their teenage years, all of it. He made that choice, Melissa. You didn't make it for him. I know, but it's still sad, for the kids especially. They didn't deserve to lose their father. No, they didn't. But they also didn't deserve to have a father who was a criminal. You gave them honesty and integrity instead. That's worth more in the long run. We drove home in silence. At the house, Emma and Noah were waiting with Sarah, who'd been watching them during the sentencing. The kids ran to Melissa, hugging her tight. Is it over? Emma asked. Are we safe now? It's over, baby. We're safe. Everything's going to be okay. That night, after the kids were in bed, Melissa and I sat on the back porch despite the cold, wrapped in blankets and holding mugs of tea. What do I do now? Melissa asked. I'm 34 years old, a single mother, living with my mom. My marriage is over. My husband is in prison. My whole life plan just disappeared. Now you build a new plan, one that's based on who you really are and what you really want, not on what you thought you were supposed to want. I don't even know where to start. You start small. You focus on the kids, on your work, on healing from all of this. And slowly, day by day, you figure out who you want to be. There's no rush. There's no deadline. You just take it one step at a time. Can we stay here with you until I figure things out? You can stay here as long as you need. This house has plenty of room. And honestly, having you and the kids here has made it feel less empty, less lonely without your father. She leaned her head on my shoulder like she used to do when she was a little girl. I'm sorry, Mom, for not seeing what Brad was sooner, for pushing you to trust him, for all of it. You have nothing to apologize for. You were betrayed, not wrong. And when you saw the truth, you acted on it with courage and integrity. That's what I'll remember about all of this. Not that you married the wrong man, but that when you discovered who he really was, you chose to do what was right. We sat together in companionable silence, watching the winter stars appear in the darkening sky. Somewhere in those stars, I like to think Richard was watching over us, proud of how we'd protected what he'd built, how we'd stood strong against someone who'd tried to take it. The money he'd left me had been meant to provide security, and it had. Not just financial security, but The security of knowing I could help my daughter when she needed me. The security of knowing I could provide for my grandchildren's future. The security of knowing that I was strong enough to stand up to manipulation and fraud. $33 million. I finally understood what it was really worth. Not the number in the account, but the freedom it provided. Freedom to make choices. Freedom to help the people I loved. Freedom to start over when necessary. Freedom to be generous without fear. Richard had given me that freedom, and I was determined to use it well. Over the following months, life slowly found a new rhythm. Melissa enrolled in online business courses, learning skills to expand her graphic design work into a more substantial business. Emma and Noah adjusted to their new, normal, occasional sadness about their father, balanced by the stability and love they found at Grandma's house. I started volunteering at a nonprofit that helped women escaping difficult situations, using my experience to counsel others facing betrayal and reconstruction. 6 months after the trial, Melissa came to me with a proposal. Mom, I want to start my own design firm. Really establish myself instead of just taking freelance projects here and there. But I need to start up capital. I know I could ask you for the money, but I don't want to. I want to do this on my own. What if I offered it as a loan? Proper interest, proper repayment schedule, all of it formal and businesslike. Her face lit up. You'd do that? Of course. I believe in you. Your work is excellent. You just need the capital to get started properly. Let me be your first investor. We worked with my financial team to structure a formal business loan with fair terms. Melissa launched her company 6 weeks later, already having landed 2 major clients through her networking and portfolio. Watching her confidence rebuild, watching her take control of her own financial future was worth more than any dollar amount. A year after Brad's sentencing, I received a letter from him in prison. I almost threw it away unopened, but curiosity won out. Catherine, it began. Not even dear Catherine, just my name. I've had a lot of time to think about everything that happened. My attorney says I should write you an apology letter for the parole board to see eventually, but I can't bring myself to apologize for trying to access money that should have been partly Melissa's anyway. Richard was her father too. She deserved to inherit something. I was just trying to help my family get what we deserved. If you'd been more generous from the start, none of this would have been necessary. But I do regret that it damaged my relationship with my kid. I hope you'll bring them to visit me someday. They should know their father, Brad. I read the letter twice, marveling at the complete lack of genuine remorse or understanding. He still didn't get it, still believed his own justifications, still blamed me for his choices. I showed the letter to Melissa. She read it and shook her head. He learned nothing. After everything, he learned absolutely nothing. No, he didn't. But you did. I did. We learned what really matters. We learned who we can trust. We learned that we're stronger than we thought. He may never learn, but we did. I wrote back a single line. Brad, my attorney advises me not to respond to your letters. Any future communication should go through legal channels. The children will make their own decisions about contact with you when they're old enough to do so. Catherine, he didn't write again. 2 years after Richard's death, I stood in the cemetery placing flowers on his grave. It was early spring, the first warm day after a long winter. Crocuses were starting to push through the ground, hopeful and bright. I did it, Richard, I said aloud, not caring if anyone heard me talking to a headstone. I protected what you built. I took care of our family. I didn't let anyone take advantage of me. I think you'd be proud. The wind picked up slightly, rustling the leaves of the oak tree that shaded his grave. I chose to believe it was his way of answering. Of course I'm proud. I always knew you were stronger than you thought. I thought about the woman I'd been 2 years ago, sitting in Gerald Hastings' office hearing about $33 million and feeling overwhelmed and lost. That woman had been grieving, uncertain, vulnerable. She'd trusted too easily, hadn't questioned enough, had been ready to hand over control to anyone who offered to help. But that woman had also been smart enough to trust her instincts when something felt wrong, brave enough to stand her ground when pressured, strong enough to face down someone who'd tried to manipulate her, and wise enough to recognize that real family doesn't steal from you. Real family protects you. I'd learned that money couldn't bring back someone you loved or erase the pain of loss, but I'd also learned that it could be a tool for good when used with wisdom and care. It could provide security, opportunity, education, fresh starts. It could help people you loved rebuild their lives. It could make a difference. Richard had given me that tool, and I'd learned how to use it well. As I walked back to my car, I called Melissa. "Hey, honey, what are the kids doing this afternoon?" "Emma has soccer practice and Noah has a play date." "Why?" "Cancel them. Tell them Grandma is taking everyone out for ice cream and then to the park. It's too beautiful a day to waste on schedules." "Mom, you can't just disrupt their whole afternoon." "Yes, I can. That's one of the benefits of being grandma and having more money than I'll ever spend. I can spoil my grandchildren occasionally. So cancel the activities. We're having an adventure." I heard her laugh, that genuine, joyful sound I'd missed during the dark days after Brad's arrest. "Okay, but you're explaining to Emma why we're missing soccer." "Deal. See you in 20 minutes. As I drove toward Melissa's house, our house really, since she and the kids still lived with me, and probably would for a while yet, I thought about everything that had happened. The shock of the inheritance, Brad's betrayal, Melissa's courage, the trial, the rebuilding. All of it had been painful. All of it had been necessary. All of it had taught me something essential about who I was and what I was capable of. I'd started this journey as a widow who'd just lost everything that mattered. I'd ended it as a woman who'd discovered she could protect herself, defend her family, and build something new from the ashes of loss. $33 million had been the catalyst. But the real wealth I'd gained wasn't in bank accounts or investment portfolios. It was in the knowledge that I was stronger than I'd ever imagined, that I could face down threats and betrayals and still come out standing, that I could use resources wisely to help others while protecting myself, that I could honor Richard's memory, not just by preserving what he'd left me, but by living fully and courageously in the life I had left. Thank God I'd checked those accounts when something felt wrong. Thank God I'd trusted my instincts. Thank God Melissa had found the courage to choose truth over comfort, because 2 days after Brad had shown me who he really was, I'd shown him and myself who I really was too. And that person was someone I was proud to be. Have you ever had someone you trusted try to take advantage of you? Have you ever had to choose between keeping the peace and protecting yourself? Sometimes the people who seem most helpful are the ones with the most to gain from your vulnerability. I learned that grief doesn't give others the right to exploit you, that family doesn't mean blind trust, that protecting yourself isn't selfish, it's necessary, and that real strength isn't about being invulnerable. It's about standing back up every time someone tries to knock you down. What would you have done in my situation? Would you have trusted Brad because he was family? Or would you have listened to those quiet doubts that told you something was wrong? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, subscribe for more real stories about standing up to betrayal, protecting what matters, and discovering strength you didn't know you had. Because sometimes the hardest lessons teach us the most valuable truth. Remember, your wealth, whether it's money, time, love, or trust, is yours to protect. Don't let anyone make you feel guilty for setting boundaries, asking questions, or choosing to guard what's precious to you. You deserve to be safe. You deserve to be respected. And you deserve to stand strong against anyone who tries to take what isn't theirs. Trust your instincts, verify everything, and never ever let anyone make you feel like protecting yourself is wrong.